A beloved nurse goes missing without a trace.
911?
Yes, I'd like to file a missing persons report for my sister.
They knew something nefarious had happened to her. They just couldn't pinpoint exactly what.
And everyone's a suspect.
It was kind of slow to start because of the way she went missing.
They can't leave any stone unturned.
You start taking the statements apart of the people that you think are involved.
But days pass with no answers.
I've been on denial. I just can't believe this is actually happening.
Until the truth begins to emerge.
There's some type of secretive world that she's living in.
Their relationship, it was hot and cold. They were off and on.
She found support and comfort from someone else.
Some of the messages were intimate.
He starts to feel like he's losing more control. He becomes more desperate.
And some men will stop at nothing to get that control back.
He had bought chemicals, so obviously, bing, 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 the red flags were going up everywhere.
Behind closed doors, anything can happen.
It's that whole saying of, if I can't have you, then no one else will.
June 9th, 2014. It's Monday afternoon in Midlothian, Virginia, a sprawling bedroom community just west of Richmond.
Midlothian is considered one of the more affluent suburbs of Richmond.
This is where folks come to live and play after when they go to Richmond for work.
But today, one of these hard-working professionals has seemingly disappeared without a trace. Yalitza Soba hasn't heard from her 26-year-old sister, Zolma Pabon, an LPN at St. Francis Hospital, in 3 days.
That Friday, she was texting me, and then after that, during the weekend, I really didn't hear from her.
And Monday was supposed to be Zolma's last day at St. Francis.
I will never forget that Monday, I received a message to Facebook Messenger like, hey, do you know where your sister's at? And I was like, what do you mean? They were like, she didn't show up.
Highly unusual, very dedicated nurse. She would have never missed a day of work.
I'm trying to call her, texting her, Facebook message, everything, nothing.
By that afternoon, Zolma is still unresponsive.
She had a job interview later on that same day, Monday, with a new job that she never showed up for.
What's more, Zolma has left behind her 4-year-old son with no explanation.
The family said she would have never left him for any reason.
That's when I knew something wasn't correct. And that's when I picked up the phone, called 911.
911, where's emergency?
Yes, I'd like to file a missing persons report for my sister.
She was a mother, she was a professional, she was getting a new job. So it just seemed strange that she would disappear off the face of the earth.
Zolma Pabon had always loved helping people, a trait that stemmed from her nurturing upbringing.
She was a very well-rounded person, very caring. That's kind of how I am too, but I think that's how we grew up because of our parents.
And from a young age, Zolma dreamed of becoming a nurse.
My sister is the one that will always be there for other people, take care of them, whatever they need.
When she completed her LPN training, she started working at St. Francis Hospital, where Zolma poured her heart and soul into her job.
She wanted to be the best nurse that she could be.
She was loved by her coworkers, loved by her patients, loved by the doctors.
One coworker in particular was especially impressed by the friendly young nurse.
Good morning.
Good morning, Dr. Gibbs.
John was one of the hospital's most dedicated physicians.
He was a very smart guy, very well liked at his job.
He was always work, work, work. He pretty much lived at the hospital.
Although he was 10 years her senior, soon after Zolma started working at St. Francis, John asked her out.
You have Zuma, she's this nurse. You got this doctor that works at the same hospital. It's almost like a medical power couple.
And when John wasn't at work, he was home tending to his son's special needs.
He's a single father. He's got an autistic kid.
The son that he had from a previous relationship was back and forth between the mom and him.
And Zolma was happy to help care for the young boy, filling in for John while he worked long hours.
My sister really tried to be the best role model for him. You know, she took him in.
After dating for 2 years, they were thrilled to welcome another baby boy into their family.
My sister was super excited when she found out she was going to be a mom.
They had a child. They moved in together. People were just expecting, when were they going to tie the knot?
However, balancing a demanding job and 2 young kids became challenging for Zolma.
After my nephew was born, my sister kind of wanted to take her life back. She was embracing herself, her body, everything that came with it.
She started working out. She started going to the gym, and that was her escape.
Zolma also started making plans to leave the hospital for a new job at an assisted living facility.
Her leaving the hospital was coupled with her having a lower stress style work environment.
But now, after Zolma missed an important interview for her potential new job, everyone knows something is wrong.
Zolma's friends and co-workers quickly reached out to her sister to check on her.
I was like, that's very unlike her because she's always on time. And I was like, something's not right.
Everybody immediately knew something was awry.
Police department. So the patrol officers started to generate a report, and part of that was to go see John Gibbs and ask him, where is Zolma?
We don't know much about the initial conversation with John Gibbs, but it was enough to give the officer a bad feeling.
He just felt like something wasn't right.
With a successful career, a healthy young son, and a long-term relationship with Dr. John Gibbs, it looked as if 26-year-old Zolma Pabon had everything going for her.
Zolma and John lived in a very nice, affluent area. She had been a nurse. She was beloved at the hospital.
But now, Zolma is missing, and the officer who spoke to her boyfriend can't shake his uneasy feeling.
He went and found him at work, and the patrol officer said Mr. Gibbs could give no insight other than she had left over the weekend, put in his report that something was not right.
He got with his sergeant, and the patrol sergeant said, yeah, something's wrong with that, and my office was notified quickly.
Detectives' first focus is on finding Zolma's missing car.
I knew finding her car was the next most important thing to do because there might be something in the car that would lead us to her.
With officers on the lookout for her vehicle, investigators follow up with the person who'd made the initial report, Zolma's sister, Yelitsa.
It's really important to interview the family. You have to prove that she's missing. She hasn't just left.
Her sister said that Zolma would have never left her son behind.
But they're surprised by what Yelitsa tells them next.
She's been in a good mood lately. She's going to the gym every day.
But what?
Growing up, she did have some issues with cutting, but she got counseling. She was good.
The phenomena of self-harm or cutting is a coping strategy that individuals use when they are experiencing extreme emotional pain.
When this came up that she did cut herself, of course they're going to look at that.
With a history of depression to consider, could detectives be looking at a suicide investigation?
That's something that they needed to consider.
Individuals may have long periods of abstinence from self-harming behaviors, and then they're triggered and they can relapse into the self-harming behavior again.
Hoping for a little more insight into Zolma's work life, detectives head to the hospital to speak with her fellow nurses, one of whom is particularly close with her.
Those type of nurses become family. They depend on each other.
And that day was a big deal, since it was going to be Zulma's last day.
Everyone knows she's finally gonna slow down, get to see her family, and all of a sudden, everything just goes cold.
I've been kind of concerned for her lately.
She tells detectives that Zulma had been having trouble at home. Only according to her coworker, it wasn't because of depression.
Things have gotten tense between Zuma and John.
Her relationship with John was not what it appeared to be on the outside.
I think he was probably a great doctor, but as far as when he was at home, I think things were a lot different.
Zulma was 26 years old, and she is dating this older gentleman, and at that tender age, you have big dreams. And it sounds like it's not going to be the fairy tale that you're looking for.
Not only was John not taking Zulma's needs seriously, he was skirting responsibilities at home.
Everyone I talked to said he was a hard worker, worked many, many hours. I think she felt lonely. And then a wedge started driving it between them.
According to what Zulma told her coworker, after 6 years of trying to make it work, she was planning on breaking things off with John.
She got a new lease at a new place.
Does John know about this?
I mean, yes, they have discussed it.
She had gotten to a point in that relationship where she told John that, this isn't working and we're gonna have to move on. And that's at the point where she disappeared.
So had Zulma left on her own accord?
Do you have any idea where she may be?
And they're shocked by her answer.
I think you should go ask her personal trainer.
She had a new interest at the gym. He was a trainer.
She had told several of her close friends that she was dating him.
After battling depression on and off throughout her life, Zulma Pabon's family and friends have told detectives investigating her disappearance that the 26-year-old mother had been doing well.
They'd never seen her happier. She had lost a bunch of weight. She was going to the gym.
However, she was also allegedly having an affair with her personal trainer, a man named Tariq.
They met at a local gym here, and they clicked immediately, apparently.
Now that police are dealing with a possible love triangle, does this point to foul play? Or could Zulma have run off with her new lover?
She was very happy, told all of her friends how she was looking forward to her life with him moving forward.
When the detectives sit down with Tariq, he's distraught.
He actually was crying when I met him the first time. He said he can't believe this has happened to her.
Tariq readily admits that he and Zulma have been in a relationship for a few months.
She approached me after joining the gym, just kind of hit it off.
And then at some point, Tariq starts training her.
Tariq says it wasn't long before their relationship had evolved into something more than friendship.
She was communicating with him on Facebook Messenger. And according to him, some of the messages were intimate.
At the same time, Zuma's letting them know what's going wrong at home.
According to Tariq, Zulma had been planning to leave John so they could be together.
I think Zulma was very vulnerable at that time because she wasn't getting those needs met in her primary relationship. So to meet someone who is seeing her for who she is, I can imagine that was extremely attractive to her.
Asked when he last saw Zulma, Tariq says it was Thursday at the gym.
I trained her that night after work. She picked up her son from the daycare and went home.
However, he told officers about plans of him and Zuma and their friends getting up together that Friday evening.
But that plan hinged on John coming home to watch the couple's 4-year-old.
The goal was when John came in Friday, he would relieve Zuma, allowing her to go out.
But Tariq says that when Friday rolled around, Zulma never showed. Then, around 9:30 that night, she sent him a text saying John wouldn't be back for a while.
She's home with the kids. He stays at work late. She finally tells Tariq, listen, he's not coming home. I'm not going to be able to make it tonight. I'm sorry.
He says he sent her a follow-up text, but she never responded. And she hadn't responded to any of his other texts since.
It's not common for her not to reply.
Then Tariq unveils another crucial detail.
She had relayed to him that she was fearful, that Mr. Gibbs was acting very possessive.
And he could be very threatening.
The weeks leading up to her disappearance, she told him, I'm scared of him.
Tariq's story suggests that John might be responsible for his girlfriend's disappearance. But is he telling the truth?
Detectives looked at Tariq's phone to find out exactly what was said, how it was said.
And the log of messages appears to support his story.
You can see from the activity that he was reaching out to her.
Detectives release Tariq and take a deeper dive into the trio's digital footprint.
We requested cell phone records for Zulma's phone, for John Gibbs' phone, for Tariq's phone.
Cell tower records for Tariq confirm he wasn't involved.
Tariq's phone indicated that he was nowhere near the townhouses for that whole evening.
John's phone records, however, reveal different insight.
There are multiple texts and phone calls that aren't answered from Zulma to John.
John knew she wanted to go out. She's expecting him home at a certain time, and she's calling, and he's not picking up.
I have no idea what the content of those phone calls and texts are, but from the fact that they're all going one direction, I could surmise that a lot of them were, where are you? You're supposed to be home.
It's not hard to imagine that when he did get home, an argument ensued.
Where were you? Where were you? Why are you?
Hello to you too.
You knew I had plans.
I was busy.
You knew I had. No, you're doing this on purpose.
There was traffic.
You're lying. You're doing this on
purpose. I'm not lying.
One that may have gotten out of hand.
I'm
so tired of this.
Then around midnight or 1 o'clock in the morning, her phone is turned off and never used again.
You have no more calls going out. The only data that you have coming in is data of people reaching out to her.
Hoping to find out more, the detectives head to Zulma and John's neighborhood to conduct a canvass.
They hit the ground to get surveillance footage from the neighborhood.
While several homes in the upscale neighborhood had security systems and cameras, none provide direct coverage of John and Zulma's house.
However, there is one camera that covers the entrance to the development.
There was an outside camera on the clubhouse for the community. And to our good fortune, the camera looked at one front door of one townhouse in that whole community, and it was John Gibbs's front door.
When the detectives review the footage, they spot Zulma's car driving out of the neighborhood Saturday morning.
Zulma's vehicle left the townhouses at 6:30 the morning of the 7th, that Saturday morning.
Tariq had an alibi for Friday night, but was it possible Zulma had slipped out to see him early the next morning?
Unfortunately, from the angle of the camera, it is impossible to see who's driving the car.
But they do find another potential clue.
15 minutes after Zulma Carr has left the premises, there's a person that's walking back.
And he bears a striking resemblance to John Gibbs.
You see him walking back through the camera and he goes back in the house.
Detectives investigating the disappearance of beloved nurse Zulma Pabon have just uncovered images that cast a dark shadow on her estranged boyfriend, Dr. John Gibbs.
At 6:30 in the morning, you see Zulma's car leave in the camera.
They saw the vehicle leave and someone who they believe was John coming back in minutes later.
Had John driven Zulma's car out of their neighborhood and abandoned it somewhere?
If John is walking back into the neighborhood 15 minutes after the car left, that implies that he hadn't gone far.
Detectives need to find her car And to speed up the search, they call in reinforcements.
There are resources used by companies that do repossessions. They're license plate readers, and we had access to that system.
While waiting on the results, detectives ask John to come to the station so they can confront him with their new evidence. But this time, he stonewalls them.
He wasn't cooperating. He wasn't talking to the police.
While it's entirely within John's rights to choose not to talk with investigators, given the circumstances, it seems suspicious.
His behavior almost confirms his guilt.
But they're a long way from having enough evidence to make an arrest.
This is a completely circumstantial case at this point. So they set up surveillance.
Detectives also place a tracking device on John's minivan while it's parked at the hospital.
We would spend days following around, watching what he was doing.
The surveillance produces little of note.
It was extremely frustrating. When you have a case where the victim is missing and you have no idea what happened to him, it multiplies everything.
This is Humphreys.
Also frustrated by the lack of progress in locating Zolma, her sister Yelitsa comes up with an idea.
She very much wants to go talk to John and ask him what's up. So we asked her, would you be willing to record it?
Yelitsa is more than willing. And on June 15th, 6 days after reporting Zolma missing, she reaches out to John.
Hello, Yelitsa.
Hey, John, how are you?
I'm all right. Have you guys heard anything from school?
No, I have not. At all.
On the phone, John sounds genuinely concerned.
I've been sending her text messages and stuff, and she hasn't replied again.
You haven't heard anything at all?
No, this is not actually done. This not for anything.
He felt like he was worried, but it was very fake.
Yelitsa keeps her composure, establishing a rapport with John. For now.
Yelitsa wants to confront John, so detectives have a plan to drop by the hospital unannounced the following day.
But before that happens, detectives get a hit from the license plate reader system. On June 16th, Zolma's car is located abandoned in a trailer park off Route 1.
The vehicle was found 16 miles or so away.
Obviously, John didn't walk those 16 miles in 15 minutes from the time where surveillance saw his car leaving the neighborhood and him walking back in.
They suspected there was some sort of tow truck or something that took that vehicle to the trailer park.
At first, the search of the car seems fruitless.
The inside appeared normal, really nothing to indicate foul play.
But then, inside the trunk, they uncover something suspicious.
In the back of the vehicle, there's a piece of paper, red coloring on it. Detectives believe that it's blood.
They send the paper off for forensic testing. And just as they finish with Zolma's vehicle, it's time for her sister Yelitsa to surprise John at the hospital.
Her sister went and confronted him at work.
I'm trying to, of course, like I'm trying to find my sister. I just found out that her car was found.
He really couldn't give her any answers other than, I don't know what to tell you.
You know anybody that might live there?
John wouldn't give any information to the sister.
You're scared? That's my sister.
To put it bluntly, she was very forceful with him and had him in tears at the end of the conversation.
That triggered him after their conversation to leave.
He goes to his house, comes out with a bag of trash.
Surveillance sees him then drive from the townhouse down past the trailer park down to the next exit.
After getting off the interstate, John pulls into a construction site.
He's across the county, 20 miles from their townhome complex.
He gets out of the van, throws that trash bag in a construction dumpster.
He throws it in the dumpster when there's trash cans and places for him to dump stuff in his own neighborhood.
John then gets back in his car and heads back in the direction where detectives have just found Zolma's car.
And he slowed down and he looked like he was going to turn into the trailer park, but then he ended up going straight.
At that point, he knew we were there.
From the trailer park, John drives home, and while an officer sits on the house, detectives rush back to the construction site.
We ended up recovering the bag, and in the bag was a comforter from a bedspread and a remote control.
For whatever reason, he felt the need right after they found the vehicle to get rid of these items. That's going to lead any investigator to ask why.
There's no blood visible on the bedding, so detectives bring in cadaver dogs.
The cadaver dogs alerted on the comforter. So at some point, there were some sort of human remains on that comforter.
But while the findings are suggestive, there's still not enough to arrest John for murder. And before they know it, John is on the move again.
He knew that they were watching, and instead of just sitting on things, he started taking road trips that didn't make sense.
Within 12 hours, he was on the road headed to California.
A week into 26-year-old Zolma Pabon's disappearance, evidence that her boyfriend John Gibbs disposed of has dashed any hopes detectives had of finding Zolma alive.
That same comforter that we've seen John travel miles and miles away just to throw in the dumpster, the cadaver dog is hitting on it. At that point, police officers, they know something's wrong here.
And by the next morning, John is on the road again, this time with his 2 kids in tow.
At 7 o'clock in the morning, I got a phone call saying he's moving. We quickly got in the cars and started following the tracker.
The detectives maintain surveillance on him, hoping John will lead them to more clues. But instead, he drives all the way across Virginia.
He basically was headed west, and we had to make a decision about how far we were going to follow him.
I think it was around Tennessee, and our command staff was like, we're not going any further. Good thing about it was that we had a tracker on his car, so we were able to tell where he was going.
John keeps going west, all the way to California.
We kept calling, and he would never answer. Finally got him on the phone, and he said he was on vacation with his children.
The mother of your child is missing, and you get your kids and literally end up going to California. You just don't do that.
But when John returns to work, detectives are waiting there for him in the parking lot.
Dr. Gibbs, give me just a minute. How you doing, sir? I'm Detective Clayton. We talked on the phone?
Yes.
And I really need to get that statement from you.
We just tried to be cordial with him and say, hey, we really need to sit down and talk.
I was hoping that maybe we could do that this morning.
No, I'm not going to be able to do it this morning. I'm the only doctor working in the hospital.
He just blew him off and wouldn't even speak to him.
Here's the thing. We have a boss like everybody else.
Yeah.
And if I go back this morning and I say, I saw Dr. Gibbs this morning and he doesn't want to come down here and talk to us, you know what that is going to make them think? That you are guilty as the day is long.
But John refuses to take the bait.
I don't understand what more you guys want me to say.
So detectives confront him with some of the evidence they found. The time-stamped surveillance images and the items he tossed in the dumpster.
Why were you throwing a bag of sheets and a remote away in a dumpster all the way down on Woods Edge Road?
Remote and the sheets?
Mm-hmm. He became visibly nervous and could not give an answer as why he threw that stuff in the dumpster.
This is your chance to tell us, because later on it won't matter.
But John remains adamant.
I love this woman. I mean, I took care of this woman. I did everything for her.
come down and talk to us?
No, I won't be coming down.
All right.
With John no longer cooperating, the detectives turn back to the evidence.
Because it was obvious to us that something bad had happened to Zulma, we did a search warrant on their residence.
They don't find anything that directly proved foul play. But in the couple's bedroom, they are able to connect one piece of the puzzle.
I had forensics bring me the remote control that he threw in the dumpster, and it turned on the television in the bedroom. So at that point, I knew something had happened in their bedroom.
Also found in the bedroom was a laptop, and once forensics unlocks it, they find more curious evidence in the internet search history.
He had been searching how to knock someone out with ether, how to track a cell phone, a lot of very suspicious stuff.
And receipts found in his home show that John had made some unusual purchases after Zulma disappeared.
They found a receipt where he had purchased approximately 14 gallons of muriatic acid. He bought a big pair of rubber gloves.
Muriatic acid is primarily a pool cleaner, but can also be used to remove bloodstains.
Now, he's a physician. He knows how to clean up blood, and he's looking for chemical agents to help, which shows that he's calculated.
So obviously, I mean, bing, 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 the red flags are going up everywhere.
Finally, detectives catch a much-needed break when they get the crime lab's report on the evidence found in the car.
They confirm that the stained piece of paper that they found in the back of Zulma's car is indeed blood.
It comes back with the DNA that matches Zulma. So now we've got blood-stained paper in the back of Zulma's car. We've got a comforter from the dumpster that has gotten a positive hit for a cadaver. So now things are getting real interesting.
But still, without Zulma's body, the police and prosecutors are reluctant to make an arrest.
The problem we have in Virginia is there is no law against missing people. So sometimes you let some time pass before you can say that there's probable cause.
So, at least for the time being, John remains at large.
To proceed with a no-body homicide, you have to prove that they were murdered and not something else. So you're basically working two cases that are simultaneous.
What needed to be done was more time to prove things like that she wasn't using a credit card, she wasn't getting a paycheck, things that took months to prove.
As weeks turn into months, it becomes more and more clear that Zulma is not just missing, she's dead.
She had not renewed her nursing license. She had not gotten a new driver's license, and then she missed birthdays, holidays. That's the type of stuff that you have to build up to show that someone has been taken off this earth.
And it seemed as though John knew the walls were closing in.
He gave all his parental rights and everything to his sister in North Carolina, and then I couldn't really see my nephew. So he knew this was coming.
Finally, in March of 2017, almost 3 years after Zulma's disappearance, prosecutors finally give the go-ahead to place John under arrest for murder.
He was at a ski resort. We went out to the ski resort, and I see him walking. I told him, "You're under arrest." Took him to the local police department to try to interview him, at which point he said, "I plead the fifth." And they transported him to our jurisdiction, and he was booked into our jail, charged with first-degree murder.
But without Zulma's body, can the prosecutors manage to secure a murder conviction?
They don't have a murder weapon, they don't have a confession, and they don't have a cause of death.
It's a very circumstantial case that we built against him.
Almost 3 years after Zulma Pabon disappeared, investigators have finally placed her estranged boyfriend, John Gibbs, under arrest for murder.
I think John was thinking, hey, if they don't find the body, they got nothing. And that wasn't the case.
When the case finally goes to trial in November of 2017, the prosecutors argue that not only is Zulma dead, but John is responsible.
It was a bold decision to move forward with first-degree murder, because when you're looking at first-degree murder, you're not only looking at the malice, you're looking at the premeditation.
To prove it, they point to the evidence that Zulma was in the process of leaving John.
She had made the decision to leave Mr. Gibbs. She had got an apartment arranged. She had a new job. A friend that she met at the gym, she was dating.
She had actually put the pieces together to be separated from this toxic relationship.
And once John realized she was pulling away, he decided to take steps to stop her.
It's that whole saying of, if I can't have you, then no one else will.
According to prosecutors, everything came to a head on the evening of June 6, 2014. Law enforcement theorized that the night Zulma went missing, she had plans to meet up with her lover, Tariq, and several friends from the gym.
They were doing most of the communicating on Facebook Messenger. I feel confident Dr. Gibbs was reading her messages, and I think that night he knew she had a date. And he was going to purposely stay at work just to make things difficult for her.
And when John did come home from work late, an argument ensued. And at some point, things had turned violent. Prosecutors referenced John's internet research as proof of premeditation.
It's firmly my belief that he took that ether and knocked Zulma out and then did whatever he did with her.
They allege that once Zulma was dead, he'd wrapped her body in the comforter, loaded her into the trunk of her car, and driven off in the early morning hours.
We believe when the car left at 6:30 that morning that she was probably in the trunk of the car.
The theory is that he got rid of her body and then dumped the car.
But how the car ended up at the trailer park remains a mystery.
John most likely had gotten in contact with somebody to help him move the car.
The question is, who was it that towed that vehicle away? Was it a tow company, or did John have somebody else involved?
But the biggest question that remains is, what happened to Zulma's body?
Till this day, we don't know exactly what happened. We have some ideas because of the evidence that was shown in court, the pictures and the videos, but we never really, till this day, has some type of closure because he would not give anything at all, and we don't have a body.
When it's their turn to present, the defense doubles down on Zulma's struggles with her mental health.
His lawyers tried to use the fact that maybe she killed herself, and my answer to that is, I've worked plenty of suicides. You don't not find their body.
On December 6th, 2017, each side gives their closing arguments.
Our local prosecutor's closing argument for the jury had the courtroom in tears. I still get a little choked up about it. Sorry. It was very moving.
After an 8-day trial, it takes the jury 2 days to come to a decision.
In the end, they found him guilty. John got 50 years.
Justice was served, but anytime you have someone who loses their life, justice is never really served.
She was just my best friend. I'm sorry. She was my everything. My sister was a person, and till this day will be a person that you will look up to her as a great daughter, mother, aunt, co-worker, friend, sister, all the above.
My biggest advice to anybody that feels like they're in a situation where they don't control their own lives is, if you decide to leave, don't tell the person you're leaving. Pack your things, tell a trusted person that that's what you're doing, and never go back. Because if you go back, you're behind closed doors and anything can happen.
On the evening of November 21st, 2004, firefighters were called to a vehicle engulfed in flames on the outskirts of Naples, Italy. Burning cars were not uncommon in a city that had spent decades living under the shadow of organized crime. Fires could erase evidence, settle scores, or simply send a message. To many first responders, another burning vehicle did not immediately suggest that they were about to encounter one of the most heartbreaking crimes in modern Italian history. As the flames gradually surrendered to water and smoke drifted into the cool November air, what remained inside the small Fiat 600 transformed an ordinary emergency response into the beginning of a murder investigation that would shock an entire nation. Hidden within the charred remains of the vehicle was the body of a young woman. Her remains had been so severely damaged by the fire that identification was not immediately possible. Investigators standing around the blackened shell of the car could already tell that whoever had done this had wanted more than a kill. They had wanted to erase the victim's identity, erase the circumstances of her death, erase every trace that could explain why she had ended up inside a burning car. Yet fire has limits. It destroys much, but not everything. The truth, although buried beneath ash and silence, would slowly emerge over the months and years that followed. The young woman was identified as Gelsomina Verde. She was 21 years old. She was not known to police. She had no criminal record. She was not a member of any criminal organization. She did not traffic drugs. She did not carry weapons. She was neither a witness under protection nor an informant. By every available measure, she was an ordinary young woman trying to build an ordinary life. She worked in a leather factory, earned an honest living, and devoted part of her free time to volunteer activities. Her family knew her as a hard-working daughter. Friends remembered her as quiet and kind. There was nothing in her life that suggested she would become the victim of one of the most infamous killings associated with the Camorra, the powerful criminal organization that had shaped life in Naples for generations. That simple fact made the discovery even more disturbing. In the brutal arithmetic of organized crime, victims were often portrayed as participants in a dangerous world. Whether that perception was accurate or not, it allowed many outsiders to distance themselves from the violence. But Gelsomina Verde did not fit that narrative. She had not entered the criminal underworld. Instead, the criminal underworld entered her life. Her murder would eventually become a symbol of something far larger than a single homicide. It exposed how the violence of organized crime could consume people who had never chosen to be part of it. It revealed how, during periods of escalating conflict, even a past personal relationship could become a death sentence. To understand why Gelsomina died, it is necessary to understand the city in which she lived. Naples in 2004 was experiencing one of the bloodiest chapters in the long history of the Camorra. Beneath the ordinary rhythm of daily life, families going to work, children attending school, shopkeepers opening their businesses each morning, another reality existed. Rival criminal groups were fighting a violent internal war over control of lucrative drug trafficking networks. Entire neighborhoods lived with the constant awareness that shootings could erupt without warning. Loyalty and betrayal were measured not merely in words, but in lives. Every arrest created opportunities for new alliances. Every defection risked another cycle of revenge. The conflict was not confined to those carrying weapons. It spread outward, drawing in relatives, acquaintances, and anyone who could be exploited as leverage against an enemy. By late 2004, the struggle had escalated into what became known as the First Scampia feud. The conflict pitted the powerful Di Loro clan against a breakaway faction known as the Scissionisti. The feud revolved around control of territory and the enormously profitable narcotics trade. As violence intensified, killings became increasingly frequent. Members of opposing factions hunted one another relentlessly. Kidnappings, interrogations, and retaliatory executions became tools used to obtain information or intimidate rivals. Within this climate, suspicion itself could become deadly. Anyone believed to possess useful information about an opposing faction risked becoming a target, regardless of whether that belief was true. Gelsamina Verde found herself caught in this widening circle of violence for one reason alone. At one point in her life, she had been romantically involved with a man named Gennaro Natorno. Their relationship had already ended months before her death. By the time the events of November 2004 unfolded, the two were no longer together. Yet circumstances beyond her control had changed. Gennaro Natorno had become associated with the Sicionisti, the faction at war with the Di Loro clan. To those searching desperately for him, an old relationship became a possible source of intelligence. Whether she actually knew where he was became almost irrelevant. The mere possibility that she might possess information was enough to place her in extraordinary danger. Investigators would later conclude that Gelsamina most likely did not know where her former boyfriend was hiding. Their relationship had already ended before the conflict reached its most violent stage. Nevertheless, those responsible for hunting members of the rival faction believed otherwise. In the atmosphere created by the Scampia feud, certainty was replaced by suspicion, and suspicion often justified unimaginable brutality. The objective was simple: locate a rival. The method was equally simple: pressure anyone who might know something. Innocents offered no protection when criminal organizations believed valuable information could be extracted through fear and violence. As investigators reconstructed the events of that November day, they discovered that Gelsamina had not stumbled into danger by accident. She had been deliberately targeted. According to later findings, members of the Di Loro clan believed she could lead them to Gennaro Natorno. One individual, Pietro Esposito, allegedly played a role in luring her to what appeared to be an ordinary meeting. There was no indication that she anticipated what awaited her. There was no evidence suggesting she expected to become the victim of a kidnapping. Like countless ordinary meetings that occur every day, this one began without any obvious sign that it would become the final journey of her life. What happened after she arrived would become one of the most disturbing episodes of the Scampia feud. Investigators later established that she was abducted and taken to a location controlled by members of the Di Loro clan. Over the course of several hours, she was repeatedly questioned about the whereabouts of Gennaro Natorno. She was beaten. She was threatened with firearms. Again and again, her captors demanded information they believed she possessed. Yet the investigation would later conclude that she almost certainly did not know what they wanted to hear. Whether she genuinely lacked the information or simply refused to cooperate, the outcome remained the same. Hours of interrogation produced nothing that satisfied her captors. Eventually, the decision was made to kill her. According to forensic findings, Gelsamina Verde was shot 3 times in the head and neck. The examination later confirmed that these gunshot wounds caused her death. Only afterward was her body placed inside her Fiat 600. The vehicle was then set on fire. Investigators believed the burning of the car served multiple purposes: to conceal evidence of the interrogation and violence that had preceded her death, to complicate forensic examination, and to obscure the full brutality of the crime. Yet despite these efforts, investigators were ultimately able to determine that she had already died before the fire began. As news of the murder spread, outrage quickly extended far beyond Naples. Italians had grown accustomed to hearing reports of organized crime, but this case struck a different nerve. Gelsamina Verde had not been involved in the conflict consuming the city's criminal underworld. She had not chosen sides in a gang war. She had not profited from illegal activity. She had simply known someone who, months earlier, had been part of her personal life. That single connection became enough to cost her everything. Her death challenged the comforting assumption that organized crime only destroys those who willingly participate in it. Instead, it demonstrated that violence can spread outward until it reaches completely innocent lives. The investigation that followed would eventually identify those believed to have participated in the crime, leading to convictions, appeals, and even new arrests nearly 2 decades later. Witness testimony, statements from former Camorra members who cooperated with authorities, forensic evidence, and years of investigative work gradually reconstructed the sequence of events that ended with a burned vehicle on a November night. Yet while courts would eventually assign legal responsibility, another question continued to resonate throughout Italy. How had a young woman with no connection to organized crime become one of the most enduring symbols of its cruelty? To answer that question, we must begin long before the flames, long before the murder, and long before investigators pieced together the final hours of Gelsona Verde's life. It begins with the city she called home, the criminal war unfolding around her, and the ordinary life that was suddenly and irrevocably pulled into an extraordinary tragedy. Before Gelsomina Verde became known across Italy as one of the most tragic innocent victims of the Camorra, she was simply a young woman living an ordinary life in Naples. Her name did not appear in police files. She was not the subject of criminal investigations. She did not occupy a position of influence or wealth, nor was she associated with the violent conflicts that were reshaping parts of her city in 2004. Like thousands of other young Italians her age, her days revolved around work, family, familiar neighborhoods, and hopes for the future. The contrast between the life she lived and the manner in which she died is precisely what transformed her story into one of the defining symbols of organized crime's indiscriminate cruelty. To understand why her murder resonated so deeply throughout Italy, it is necessary to understand not only who Gelsomina was, but also the environment in which she lived, a city where ordinary life and extraordinary violence existed side by side, often separated by nothing more than a single street or a single relationship. Gelsomina Verde was born in 1982. By the autumn of 2004, she was 21 years old. She worked at a leather manufacturing factory, earning a living through ordinary employment rather than through any connection to the underground economy that fueled much of the violence around Naples. Available records describe her as a young woman who also devoted part of her time to volunteer activities. Those details, although brief, offer an important glimpse into the kind of person investigators and journalists would later describe after her death. She was not someone whose life revolved around conflict or criminal associations. Instead, she represented thousands of young people trying to establish themselves through honest work while living in neighborhoods where organized crime had long exercised influence over everyday life. Nothing in the available evidence suggests that Gelsomina had any role within the Camorra or any other criminal organization. She had no criminal record, no documented involvement in drug trafficking, extortion, or violent offenses. In legal terms, and in the eyes of investigators, she was an entirely innocent civilian. That innocence would become the defining characteristic of her case. Many homicides linked to organized crime involve rival gang members, informants, or individuals who knowingly participate in criminal enterprises. Such cases often become entangled in complex networks of retaliation, loyalty, and illegal business. The murder of Gelsomina Verde followed a very different pattern. She was not targeted because of actions she had taken within the criminal world. She became a target because of a personal relationship that had already ended before the violence reached its most destructive stage. Understanding that distinction is essential, because it explains why her death became more than another statistic in a city already accustomed to organized crime. It became evidence that the expanding violence of the Camorra could consume people who had never chosen to participate in it. To appreciate how this became possible, one must first understand Naples itself during the early years of the 21st century. Naples is one of Italy's oldest and most culturally significant cities, famous throughout the world for its history, architecture, cuisine, and artistic heritage. It is a city of remarkable beauty and remarkable complexity. Alongside its historic churches, crowded piazzas, and vibrant neighborhoods existed another reality that had developed over generations: the enduring presence of the Camorra. Unlike a single centralized organization, the Camorra consisted of numerous clans that competed, cooperated, and frequently fought one another for power. Their influence extended into various forms of criminal activity, including drug trafficking, extortion, illegal commerce, and territorial control. For many residents, daily life involved navigating both the ordinary structures of society and the informal power exercised by criminal organizations within certain districts. Among the neighborhoods most frequently associated with Camorra activity were Scampia and Secondigliano, located in the northern outskirts of Naples. These districts would become internationally known not because of their communities alone, but because they emerged as central battlegrounds in one of the bloodiest internal conflicts in Camorra history. Although countless law-abiding families lived there, the area had also become strategically important for criminal organizations due to its role in the distribution of illegal narcotics. Control over these drug trafficking routes generated enormous profits. With such financial stakes involved, disputes over leadership and territory often escalated into violence. By 2004, tensions that had been building within the Camorra erupted into open warfare. The conflict later became known as the First Scampia Feud. On one side stood the powerful Di Loro clan, which had established extensive influence over drug distribution networks in the area. Opposing them was a breakaway faction known as the Sicionisti, composed of former allies who had separated from the Di Loro organization. What began as an internal dispute evolved into an escalating campaign of assassinations, reprisals, and efforts to eliminate rival leadership. The struggle was not confined to isolated criminal confrontations. It affected entire neighborhoods, creating an atmosphere in which fear became an ordinary part of everyday existence. During this period, violence became increasingly systematic. Rival members were hunted across Naples. Individuals suspected of assisting one faction could become targets of the other. Kidnappings were carried out to obtain intelligence. Interrogations were used to locate rivals in hiding. Murders occurred with alarming frequency as each side attempted to weaken the other's operational network. Every successful attack risked triggering another retaliation. Every defection created new suspicions. The feud rapidly expanded beyond direct participants, placing additional pressure on relatives, friends, former associates, and anyone believed capable of revealing useful information. This broader pattern is essential to understanding the circumstances surrounding Gelsamina Verde's murder. The violence of the First Scampia feud did not remain confined to those actively carrying weapons. Criminal organizations frequently sought information through indirect means, identifying people connected by family ties, friendships, or past relationships to members of rival groups. Such individuals were viewed not necessarily as enemies, but as possible sources of intelligence. Whether they actually possessed valuable information often became secondary. Suspicion itself could justify coercion. In an environment where locating a rival might determine the outcome of future attacks, criminal groups increasingly relied on intimidation and violence against people who occupied the margins of the conflict rather than its center. Among those being sought by members of the Di Loro clan was Gennaro Natorno. At some point before the events of November 2004, Gennaro had become associated with the Sicionisti, the faction opposing the Di Loro organization. Before that development, however, he and Gelsona Verde had shared a romantic relationship. The available evidence consistently indicates that this relationship had already ended months before the murder. By the time the Scampia feud intensified, they were no longer together. This fact would later prove significant during the investigation because authorities concluded that Gelsomina most likely no longer knew where Gennaro was living or hiding. Nevertheless, the distinction between current and former relationships carried little weight within the logic of the criminal organizations involved in the feud. To those searching for Gennaro Nettorno, Gelsomina represented a possible path toward locating him. The assumption appears to have been simple. If she had once been close to him, she might still possess information regarding his whereabouts, his contacts, or the places he frequented. Investigators later determined that this assumption was almost certainly mistaken. Yet organized crime often operates on perceived possibilities rather than verified facts. During periods of intense conflict, uncertainty can become justification for extreme measures. If there existed even a chance that Gelsomina possessed useful information, members of the Di Loro clan were prepared to exploit that possibility. This tragic logic reveals one of the most disturbing aspects of organized criminal violence. The objective was not to punish Gelsomina for anything she herself had done. Rather, she became valuable because of what others believed she might know. Her personal identity, employment, character, and innocence offered no protection against individuals focused exclusively on locating an enemy. Within that framework, human relationships became tools. A former girlfriend could become leverage. A family member could become a bargaining instrument. An acquaintance could become a target simply because someone imagined that useful information might exist. Investigators examining the case years later reached an important conclusion. Gelsomina almost certainly did not possess the information her captors sought, since her relationship with Gennaro Nettorno had already ended before the murder. There is little reason to believe she maintained knowledge of his whereabouts. This conclusion would later reinforce the profound tragedy at the center of the case. She was subjected to violence not because she refused to reveal information she certainly possessed, but because those responsible refused to consider that she genuinely had nothing to tell them. From the perspective of law enforcement, the case illustrated how criminal organizations often rely on flawed assumptions during internal conflicts. Decisions are made rapidly under pressure, guided by suspicion rather than evidence. Individuals become categorized according to past associations instead of present realities. Once identified as potentially useful, they may be subjected to coercion regardless of whether the underlying assumption is accurate. Gelsomina Verde became one of the clearest examples of this process. Her former relationship with a man who had joined a rival faction became the sole thread connecting her to a violent conflict she neither initiated nor participated in. The significance of her story extends beyond the events of a single day in November 2004. Her life demonstrates how ordinary citizens can become vulnerable when organized violence expands beyond its original participants. She was not caught accidentally in random crossfire. She was deliberately selected because someone believed she could provide information. That distinction makes the crime particularly revealing. It shows that during the first Scampia feud, the boundaries separating criminal organizations from the broader community had begun to erode. Violence was no longer directed exclusively at armed rivals. It increasingly reached those connected only through personal history. As the investigation would later establish, this belief that Gelsomina knew the location of Gennaro Nettorno set into motion the events that unfolded on November 21st, 2004. A plan was developed to lure her to a meeting. She had no documented reason to suspect that accepting the invitation would place her in immediate danger. By all available accounts, she entered that day as she had countless others, unaware that she had already been chosen as a means of reaching someone else. The ordinary routine of a young factory worker was about to collide with one of the most violent criminal conflicts in modern Italian history. The next chapter begins on that November day, when a carefully arranged deception led Gelsomina Verde into the hands of people determined to obtain answers she almost certainly did not possess. On November 21st, 2004, Gelsomina Verde began what appeared to be an ordinary day. Nothing in the publicly available investigation suggests that she anticipated danger or believed she was being watched. She was not living in hiding, nor had she been warned that anyone intended to harm her. From every verified account that later emerged during the investigation, Gelsomina continued her life as she always had, unaware that her name had entered the calculations of a criminal organization consumed by a violent internal war. While she went about her daily routine, members of the Di Loro clan had already reached a devastating conclusion. They believed that the young woman who had once dated Gennaro Nattorno might possess information capable of leading them to one of their enemies. Whether that belief was accurate no longer mattered. In the atmosphere of the first Scampia feud, suspicion alone was enough to justify action. The feud had already produced a relentless cycle of revenge. Rival members of the Di Loro clan and the breakaway Sicionisti faction were engaged in an escalating campaign of killings intended to weaken each other's leadership and seize control of profitable drug trafficking routes. Every unsuccessful search for a rival increased the pressure to identify new sources of information. As investigators would later determine, Gennaro Nattorno had become one of the individuals sought by members of the Di Loro clan. Unable to locate him directly, they turned their attention towards someone who had once shared part of her life with him. The relationship itself had already ended months earlier. But in the minds of those planning the operation, that distinction carried little significance. They believed that even a former girlfriend might know where he had gone or how he could be found. According to the findings presented during subsequent investigations and court proceedings, Pietro Esposito played a role in bringing Gelsomina into the trap. She was lured to what appeared to be an ordinary meeting. Publicly available records do not describe the precise words used to convince her to come or the exact circumstances of the invitation. Rather than speculate about details that have never been officially confirmed, investigators focused on the essential fact that she accepted the meeting without realizing that it had been arranged by people intending to use her as leverage. There is no verified evidence indicating that she suspected she was walking into an ambush. For Gelsomina, it was simply another appointment. For those waiting for her, it marked the beginning of a carefully planned kidnapping. Once she arrived, the situation changed abruptly. Investigators later concluded that she was forcibly taken and transported to a location controlled by members of the Di Loro clan somewhere in Naples. The exact address of the site has never become a central element of the public record. But what occurred there became one of the defining episodes of the Scampia feud. The objective of the kidnapping was neither robbery nor ransom. No demand for money was ever made. Instead, the purpose was singular: obtain information about the whereabouts of Gennaro Nattorno. From that moment onward, Gelsomina's fate became tied entirely to a question she almost certainly could not answer. The investigation established that she was subjected to hours of interrogation. Her captors repeatedly questioned her about Gennaro Nattorno. They wanted to know where he was hiding. They wanted the names of people who might be helping him. They wanted locations associated with members of the rival Sicionisti faction. Every question reflected the broader objectives of the Di Loro clan during the feud. Finding one rival could expose many others. Information was as valuable as weapons, and those who believed they possessed it were often treated with extraordinary brutality. According to the case file, the interrogation was accompanied by violence. Gelsomina was beaten. She was threatened with firearms. The questioning continued over several hours as her captors attempted to force her to reveal information they believed she possessed. Publicly available judicial documents and investigative reports confirm that she endured prolonged abuse before her death. However, they do not provide a detailed description of every act committed against her. For that reason, it is neither necessary nor appropriate to invent details that the evidence does not support. What is firmly established is that the violence was systematic, prolonged, and intended to compel cooperation. Throughout those hours, the central assumption driving the interrogation remained unchanged. Members of the DeLauro clan believed that Gelsomina knew where Gennaro Natorno could be found. Yet as investigators reconstructed the events after her death, they reached a different conclusion. Based on the fact that the relationship between Gelsomina and Gennaro had already ended months before the murder, investigators concluded that she most likely did not know his whereabouts at all. In other words, the entire kidnapping appears to have been built upon a false assumption. That conclusion adds a profound layer of tragedy to the case. Had her captors possessed accurate information about her life, they might have realized that she no longer maintained the connection they imagined. Instead, they relied on an outdated relationship and treated it as sufficient evidence that she held valuable intelligence. Within the violent logic of organized crime, uncertainty was often answered with force rather than verification. Rather than asking whether she truly knew anything, they attempted to compel an answer through intimidation and violence. As the hours passed, no useful information emerged. Whether Gelsomina repeatedly stated that she did not know where Gennaro was, or whether she simply could not provide answers that satisfied her captors, the investigation ultimately arrived at the same conclusion. The interrogation failed to produce the information the DeLauro clan wanted. The operation had reached an impasse. The objective that justified the kidnapping had not been achieved. At that point, the individuals holding Gelsomina made a decision that would forever define the case. They chose to kill her. The forensic examination conducted after the discovery of her body established the sequence of events with important precision. Gelsomina Verde was shot 3 times in the head and neck. These gunshot wounds were identified as the direct cause of death. The findings also established another crucial fact. She died before the fire that later consumed the vehicle. This distinction would become significant during the investigation because it demonstrated that the burning of the car was not the cause of death, but rather an action carried out afterward. Following the execution, the perpetrators placed Gelsomina's body inside her own Fiat 600. Investigators later concluded that the vehicle was moved before being deliberately set on fire. The use of the victim's own car served multiple purposes. It distanced the crime scene from the location where the interrogation and killing had occurred. It also provided a means of concealing forensic evidence that might otherwise reveal more about the violence preceding her death. Fire has long been used by organized criminal groups in attempts to destroy biological evidence. Fingerprints, fibers, and other material that could identify participants or reconstruct events. Investigators concluded that this was precisely the intention in Gelsomina's case. The decision to burn the vehicle also reflected another aspect of organized criminal violence. The desire not merely to eliminate a victim, but to erase the circumstances of the crime itself. By destroying the body and the vehicle together, the perpetrators attempted to obscure both the sequence of events and the extent of the abuse she had suffered before being killed. Yet despite the severe fire damage, Forensic specialists were still able to determine that the fatal gunshot wounds had preceded the blaze. Even where flames had erased much of the physical evidence, they could not erase every trace. Later that night, or during the early hours of November 22nd, the burning Fiat 600 was discovered in the Agrelli area of Secondigliano. Firefighters extinguished the blaze, leaving investigators to confront the grim task of examining the remains. The vehicle had been almost completely destroyed. Inside lay the severely burned body of a young woman whose identity was not immediately obvious because of the extensive damage caused by the fire. Despite these difficulties, investigators were able to identify the vehicle through its registration, leading them to determine that it belonged to Gelsamina Verde. What had begun as the discovery of a burned automobile quickly became a homicide investigation. The subsequent autopsy confirmed the conclusions that would shape the remainder of the case. Gelsamina had not died in the fire. The gunshot wounds to the head and neck had already ended her life before the vehicle was ignited. This medical finding fundamentally altered investigators' understanding of the crime. It demonstrated that the fire was part of a deliberate effort to conceal the murder rather than the murder itself. News of the discovery spread rapidly across Naples and then throughout Italy. At first, many people knew only that a young woman had been found dead inside a burned car. As more information emerged, however, the public reaction intensified. Investigators confirmed that Gelsamina had no criminal record. She had not belonged to the Camorra. She had not participated in drug trafficking or gang activity. Her connection to the case rested entirely upon a past romantic relationship with a man who had become involved in the Sicilisti faction. That revelation transformed public understanding of the crime. The victim had not been an active participant in the feud. She had been an innocent civilian drawn into it against her will. Her murder quickly came to symbolize a disturbing evolution in the Scampia conflict. The feud was no longer confined to armed rivals confronting one another. It had expanded to include individuals whose only connection to organized crime was a personal relationship from the past. The killing demonstrated that the boundaries protecting ordinary citizens had become dangerously fragile. A former girlfriend could be treated as a source of intelligence. An ordinary worker could become the subject of kidnapping and interrogation. Innocence no longer guaranteed safety when criminal organizations allowed suspicion to replace evidence. Although the events of November 21st ended with Gelsamina Verde's death, they did not end the story. Investigators now faced the far more difficult task of identifying everyone responsible for planning, carrying out, and concealing the crime. The burned vehicle, the forensic examination, witness testimony, and later cooperation from former Camorra members would gradually reveal what had happened during those final hours. But on the night the Fiat 600 was discovered, none of those answers yet existed. There was only a burned car, a murdered young woman, and a growing realization that one of the most ruthless episodes of the first Scampia feud had claimed the life of someone who had never been part of the war at all. When investigators first arrived at the scene of the burned Fiat 600, they faced a crime that appeared designed to leave almost nothing behind. Fire has long been used by organized criminal groups to destroy evidence, conceal identities, and complicate forensic examinations. The vehicle had been almost completely consumed by flames, and inside lay the severely burned body of a young woman. At first glance, the destruction suggested that whoever committed the crime had taken deliberate steps to ensure that investigators would have as little physical evidence as possible. Yet criminal investigations are rarely solved by a single piece of evidence. Instead, they are built gradually through forensic analysis, witness testimony, timelines, and patient reconstruction. In the case of Gelsamina Verde, the search for the truth would extend far beyond the burned vehicle itself. eventually lasting nearly 2 decades and continuing to produce significant developments long after the murder had taken place. The first priority was establishing the identity of the victim. Although the fire had inflicted extensive damage, investigators were able to identify the vehicle through its registration records. The Fiat 600 belonged to 21-year-old Gelsamina Verde. With that identification came an immediate question that shaped the early stages of the investigation. Why would an ordinary factory worker with no criminal record be found murdered inside her own burned car? At that moment, investigators knew very little about the circumstances leading to her death. They knew only that a young woman had been killed and that someone had attempted to destroy evidence. Afterward, the autopsy became the first major step toward answering those questions. Forensic examination established that the fire was not the cause of death. Gelsamina had already died before the vehicle was set ablaze. The examination determined that she had sustained 3 gunshot wounds to the head and neck, and those wounds were identified as the direct cause of death. This finding fundamentally changed the direction of the investigation. Rather than treating the burned vehicle as the primary crime scene, investigators understood that the killing had occurred elsewhere. The fire represented an attempt to conceal the murder, not the murder itself. It also supported the conclusion that the perpetrators had acted methodically, taking additional steps after the killing in an effort to eliminate evidence and hinder the work of law enforcement. Investigators next turned their attention to reconstructing Gelsamina's final known movements. Understanding where she had gone, whom she had planned to meet, and how she had disappeared became essential. As they retraced the events of November 21st, a pattern gradually began to emerge. Gelsamina had not vanished randomly. Evidence indicated that she had been deliberately lured to a meeting. This discovery suggested planning rather than opportunity. Someone had identified her in advance, arranged contact, and created circumstances that allowed her to be isolated. Investigators would later identify Pietro Esposito as having played a role in bringing Gelsamina into that meeting, an act that prosecutors argued was an essential part of the kidnapping. As detectives continued examining her background, another important realization emerged. Gelsamina herself had no apparent connection to organized crime. Her employment at a leather factory, her participation in volunteer activities, and her lack of any criminal history made her an unlikely target for robbery, gang retaliation, or disputes commonly associated with Camorra violence. The more investigators learned about her personal life, the more unusual the murder appeared. Nothing in her recent activities suggested that she had become involved in illegal enterprises. This absence of any direct criminal connection forced investigators to search elsewhere for an explanation. The breakthrough came through examining one relationship from Gelsamina's past. Detectives established that she had previously been in a romantic relationship with Gennaro Notturno. By itself, that fact appeared insignificant. Former relationships rarely explain acts of organized crime. However, the broader context of Naples in late 2004 transformed that seemingly ordinary detail into the central motive behind the case. Investigators discovered that Gennaro Notturno had become associated with the Sicionisti. The faction engaged in violent conflict with the Di Loro clan during the first Scampia feud. Suddenly, Gelsamina's murder no longer appeared isolated. It fit within a larger pattern of a criminal organization attempting to locate members of a rival faction by targeting people believed to possess useful information. At this stage, investigators sought to answer another critical question. Did Gelsamina actually know where Gennaro Notturno was hiding? After examining the available evidence, authorities reached a consistent conclusion. The relationship between Gelsamina and Gennaro had already ended months before the murder. Because they were no longer together, Investigators believed that she most likely did not know his whereabouts. This finding became one of the defining conclusions of the investigation. It suggested that the entire kidnapping had been based upon a mistaken assumption. Those responsible apparently believed that a former girlfriend would still possess valuable information, while the evidence indicated that she probably had nothing useful to reveal. Understanding this distinction changed the moral character of the case without changing its legal nature. Gelsamina had not been killed because she refused to provide information she certainly possessed. Rather, she had been kidnapped, interrogated, and ultimately murdered because her captors refused to accept that she likely knew nothing at all. The investigation therefore portrayed her not only as an innocent victim of organized crime, but also as someone trapped by another person's false assumptions. She became collateral damage in a war she neither joined nor understood. As the inquiry expanded, investigators began assembling evidence from multiple sources. Witnesses contributed information that helped reconstruct Gelsamina's final hours. Even more significant were statements that emerged from individuals connected to the Camorra who later chose to cooperate with judicial authorities. Over time, several members or former members of the criminal organization became collaborators with justice. Their testimony allowed prosecutors to piece together aspects of the kidnapping, the interrogation, and the killing that physical evidence alone could never have revealed. Organized crime investigations often depend upon this combination of forensic science and insider testimony because criminal organizations deliberately conceal their activities and discourage cooperation through intimidation. In Gelsamina's case, the gradual willingness of certain individuals to speak proved essential in reconstructing what had happened after she disappeared. The investigation eventually established a sequence of events that explained both the murder and the attempt to conceal it. Gelsamina had been lured to a meeting, abducted, transported to a Camorra-controlled location, interrogated for several hours regarding the whereabouts of Gennaro Netturno, and subjected to violence in an effort to force her cooperation. When no useful information emerged, she was executed by 3 gunshots to the head and neck. Her body was then placed inside her Fiat 600. The vehicle was moved, and it was deliberately set on fire. Each stage reflected a calculated progression from kidnapping to interrogation, execution, and destruction of evidence. What investigators could not establish through one source alone became increasingly clear as multiple forms of evidence reinforced one another. The conclusions reached by investigators also reflected a broader understanding of the First Scampia feud itself. During the conflict, both sides sought information aggressively, often relying on relatives, friends, or former partners of rival members as potential sources. Gelsamina's murder therefore illustrated a wider investigative pattern rather than an isolated incident. She had not been selected because of her own actions, but because others believed she occupied a position from which valuable information could be extracted. This motive distinguished her case from many other organized crime homicides. The objective had never been to eliminate Gelsamina herself as a rival. The objective had been to locate someone else. Public reaction intensified as these details became known. Italians had witnessed many killings attributed to the Camorra over previous decades. Yet, Gelsamina's case resonated differently because investigators consistently emphasized her complete lack of criminal involvement. She was not portrayed as someone caught accidentally during a shooting between rival groups. She had been deliberately identified, deliberately abducted, deliberately interrogated, and deliberately murdered despite having no role in the feud itself. Newspapers, commentators, and anti-mafia organizations increasingly described her as one of the innocent victims of organized crime. Her name became associated not merely with a single criminal investigation, but with the broader human cost of the Camorra's violence. For investigators, however, the case remained unfinished even after important arrests and convictions were secured. Organized crime investigations often evolve over many years because new witnesses emerge. Former associates decide to cooperate, and previously unavailable information becomes accessible. The murder of Gelsomina Verde followed this pattern. Although significant judicial decisions were reached within a few years of the crime, authorities continued examining the roles of additional participants. The passage of time did not diminish the importance of identifying everyone believed to have contributed to the kidnapping and murder. Nearly 19 years after Gelsomina's death, the investigation entered another significant phase. In 2023, authorities arrested Luigi De Lucia and Pasquale Rinaldi on allegations that they had participated directly in the kidnapping and killing. These arrests demonstrated that the investigation had never truly ended. Instead, prosecutors continued evaluating new testimony and newly available evidence in an effort to establish the fullest possible account of what had occurred on November 21, 2004. Such developments illustrated an important principle within complex organized crime investigations. Justice often advances incrementally. New information can reshape understanding long after the original crime scene has disappeared. The continuation of the investigation also carried symbolic importance. By pursuing additional suspects nearly 2 decades later, Italian authorities communicated that crimes committed during the Scampia feud would not simply fade into history because of the passage of time. Each new witness statement, each arrest, and each judicial proceeding reinforced the principle that accountability remained possible even years after the violence itself had ended. For the family of Gelsomina Verde, and for those who viewed her as a symbol of innocent victims, these continuing efforts represented an acknowledgement that her life deserved the same determination that investigators devote to any victim of violent crime. Regardless of how much time had passed, by the conclusion of the investigative phase, authorities had established a coherent explanation for the tragedy. Gelsomina Verde was not murdered because of anything she had done. She was murdered because members of the Di Loro clan believed she could reveal the whereabouts of Gennaro Natorno, a member of the rival Sicionisti faction. Investigators concluded that she most likely possessed no such information, making the kidnapping and subsequent killing all the more tragic. The fire that consumed her vehicle failed to erase the truth. Through forensic evidence, witness testimony, and years of persistent investigative work, authorities reconstructed the events that transformed an ordinary young factory worker into one of Italy's most enduring symbols of innocent lives destroyed by organized crime. The investigation had uncovered the facts. The next challenge belonged to the courts, where evidence would be tested, responsibility assigned, and the long process of justice would begin. By the time prosecutors brought the murder of Gelsomina Verde into the courtroom, the central facts of the case had already become painfully clear. A 21-year-old factory worker with no criminal record had been abducted, interrogated for hours about the whereabouts of her former boyfriend, executed by gunfire, and placed inside her own Fiat 600 before the vehicle was deliberately set on fire. The investigation had concluded that she had almost certainly known nothing about the location of Gennaro Natorno, the man members of the Di Loro clan had been desperately trying to find during the first Scampia feud. Yet establishing what had happened was only one part of the judicial process. Italian prosecutors still faced the equally demanding task of demonstrating who had participated in the crime, what role each individual had played, and whether the available evidence met the legal standard required for conviction. Organized crime prosecutions are rarely straightforward. Violence is planned in secrecy. Witnesses are often intimidated into silence, and physical evidence may be deliberately destroyed. The burning of Gelsamana's vehicle reflected precisely that effort to erase the truth. Nevertheless, through the combination of forensic findings, investigative reconstruction, witness testimony, and statements provided by individuals who later cooperated with judicial authorities, prosecutors gradually assembled the case that would be presented before the courts. The judicial proceedings that followed reflected an important characteristic of complex organized crime cases. Responsibility is often distributed among multiple individuals rather than concentrated in a single perpetrator. A kidnapping requires planning. A victim must be located and lured into a controlled environment. Interrogations involve those carrying them out, as well as those who authorize them. The concealment of a body may involve additional participants. Consequently, prosecutors did not approach the murder of Gelsamana Verde as the isolated act of one individual acting alone. Instead, the evidence suggested that several members of the DeLauro clan had contributed to different stages of the crime. The court therefore examined not only who fired the fatal shots, but also who facilitated the kidnapping and whether senior figures within the organization had ordered or directed the operation. Establishing these distinctions would prove crucial because Italian criminal law evaluates participation according to each person's specific role within the commission of an offense. One of the earliest and most significant outcomes arrived in 2006. After reviewing the evidence presented during the proceedings, the court found Hugo de Lucia guilty of participating directly in the murder of Gelsamana Verde. He was sentenced to life imprisonment. The sentence reflected the extraordinary seriousness with which the court regarded the crime. Life imprisonment represented the maximum penalty available for offenses of this nature and underscored the judicial conclusion that Gelsamana's killing had been a deliberate execution carried out during the course of organized criminal activity. Although no sentence could restore the life that had been taken, the judgment established an essential principle. The murder of an innocent civilian during a gang conflict would be treated with the full weight of Italian criminal law, regardless of the influence or reputation of those responsible. During the same judicial process, attention also focused on the events preceding the kidnapping. Prosecutors argued that Gelsamana had not arrived at the location where she was abducted by coincidence. Instead, she had been intentionally drawn there through deception. According to the findings accepted by the court, Pietro Esposito had played a role in luring her into the trap that ultimately led to her death. Although he was not convicted as the individual who carried out the execution itself, the court concluded that his participation in bringing Gelsamana into the hands of her captors constituted a significant criminal act within the overall sequence of events. In 2006, Pietro Esposito received a prison sentence of more than 7 years, specifically 7 years and 4 months, for his role in facilitating the kidnapping. This judgment demonstrated another important aspect of organized crime prosecutions. Legal responsibility extends beyond the individual who commits the final act of violence. Those who knowingly assist in creating the circumstances that make such violence possible may also face criminal accountability. Even after these convictions, prosecutors continued examining the broader structure of responsibility surrounding the murder. Organized criminal organizations operate through chains of command in which orders may originate from senior figures while others carry them out. As investigators pursued this dimension of the case, attention turned toward Cosimo DeLauro, one of the leading figures associated with the DeLauro clan during the first Scampia feud. Prosecutors alleged that he had acted as the mastermind behind the murder of Gelsamana Verde. The accusation reflected the prosecution's theory that the kidnapping and killing had not been an isolated initiative undertaken independently by lower-ranking members, but rather part of the broader campaign conducted during the violent struggle against the Sicilianisti faction. In 2008, The judicial process reached another important milestone when Cosimo Di Loro was convicted and sentenced to life imprisonment on the allegation that he had been the principal instigator behind the crime. For many observers, the verdict appeared to reinforce the broader narrative of the Scampia feud. The murder of Gelsomina was viewed not simply as an individual act of brutality, but as one manifestation of a larger strategy employed during the internal conflict within the Camorra. The conviction suggested that responsibility could extend upward through the hierarchy of the organization, reaching those alleged to have directed or authorized operations without personally carrying them out. However, the Italian legal system provides defendants with the opportunity to challenge convictions through appellate review, particularly in cases carrying the most severe penalties. Appeals play an essential role in ensuring that criminal judgments rest upon evidence meeting the required legal standards rather than public opinion or assumptions about organizational leadership. Consequently, Cosimo Di Loro appealed his conviction. During the appellate proceedings, judges re-examined the evidence relating specifically to the allegation that he had ordered or masterminded the murder of Gelsomina Verde. The appeal produced a different legal outcome. In 2010, Cosimo Di Loro was acquitted of the accusation that he had acted as the mastermind behind the murder because the available evidence was found to be insufficient to sustain that specific charge. This aspect of the judicial history is particularly important because it illustrates a fundamental principle of criminal justice. An acquittal based upon insufficient evidence does not represent a determination that an event never occurred, nor does it necessarily establish that every allegation presented during the investigation was false. Rather, it reflects the court's conclusion that prosecutors had not demonstrated the specific allegation beyond the legal threshold required for conviction. In criminal proceedings, the burden of proof rests with the prosecution, and where that burden is not satisfied, the law requires acquittal on the relevant charge. This distinction preserves the integrity of judicial decision-making by ensuring that verdicts are grounded in evidence rather than inference. The differing outcomes in these proceedings demonstrated the complexity of assigning responsibility. Within organized crime structures, some participants were convicted based on evidence directly connecting them to specific actions, while allegations concerning broader organizational leadership required separate evaluation under the applicable legal standards. Rather than treating all defendants identically because of their association with the same criminal organization, the courts examined each allegation independently. Such an approach reflected the principle that criminal liability must correspond to the evidence, supporting each individual's conduct and role. For the family of Gelsomina Verde, however, the judicial process represented more than a sequence of legal rulings. Every hearing revisited the circumstances surrounding the loss of a young woman whose life had ended, for reasons entirely unrelated to anything she herself had done. Courtrooms became places where investigators explained how she had been selected, kidnapped, interrogated, and killed because members of a criminal organization believed she possessed information about a former boyfriend. The evidence repeatedly emphasized the same painful conclusion reached during the investigation. Gelsomina almost certainly had no knowledge of Gennaro Netturno's whereabouts. The crime therefore stood as an example of how suspicion, when combined with organized violence, can produce irreversible consequences for completely innocent individuals. Yet the legal story did not conclude with the judgments delivered during the first decade after the murder. Organized crime investigations often remain active for many years as new witnesses emerge and additional evidence becomes available. The case of Gelsomina Verde followed this familiar pattern. Nearly 19 years after her death, Italian investigators announced another significant development. In 2023, authorities arrested Luigi De Lucia and Pasquale Rinaldi on allegations that they had directly participated in the kidnapping and killing. These arrests demonstrated that prosecutors continued to pursue every individual believed to have played a role in the crime, regardless of how much time had passed since November 2004. The willingness to reopen investigative avenues after almost 2 decades reflected both the complexity of organized crime cases and the determination of Italian authorities to establish the fullest possible account of responsibility. The 2023 arrests also illustrated another reality of anti-mafia investigations. Time can alter the availability of evidence. Individuals who once remained silent may later choose to cooperate with judicial authorities. New testimony may allow investigators to reconstruct events with greater precision than had previously been possible. Organized criminal organizations themselves often change over time, creating circumstances in which former members become willing to provide information that was once considered too dangerous to reveal. As a result, investigations into historical crimes frequently continue long after public attention has shifted elsewhere. The pursuit of justice in such cases becomes a gradual process rather than a single courtroom event. Throughout these proceedings, one fact remained unchanged. The courts never treated Gelsamina Verde as someone involved in the criminal conflict that led to her death. Every stage of the investigation and prosecution reinforced the conclusion that she had been an innocent civilian. She had not participated in the Camorra. She had not taken part in the Scampia feud. She had not contributed to the violence engulfing Naples in 2004. The only connection linking her to the events was a past romantic relationship that had already ended before the kidnapping occurred. That distinction shaped both the legal narrative and the public memory of the case. Prosecutors were not merely presenting evidence of another organized crime homicide. They were presenting evidence that an entirely innocent young woman had become a target because others believed she might possess information she almost certainly did not have. Although the verdicts delivered over the years established significant legal accountability, they also underscored the limits of criminal justice. Court judgments can identify perpetrators, impose sentences, and affirm the rule of law, but they cannot reverse the consequences of violence. Gelsamina's family would never see her return home. Friends who remembered her as a hardworking young woman would forever associate her name with one of the darkest episodes of the first Scampia feud. Even successful prosecutions could not erase the broader lesson revealed by the case. Organized crime extends its harm far beyond those who choose to participate in it. The legal proceedings acknowledged responsibility, but they also left Italy confronting a more profound question about the human cost of criminal power. That question, and the enduring legacy of Gelsamina Verde's life and death, would continue to resonate long after the final verdicts had been delivered. Nearly 2 decades have passed since the events of November 21, 2004. Yet the name Gelsamina Verde continues to hold a place in Italy's collective memory that extends far beyond the details of a single criminal investigation. Many murders committed during the first Scampia feud gradually disappeared from public attention, remembered primarily within judicial records or by the families of those directly affected. Gelsamina's story followed a different path. Her death became a symbol, not because she occupied a position of power, nor because she played any role in the violent struggle that consumed Naples, but because she represented precisely the opposite. She represented ordinary people whose lives can be shattered when organized crime expands beyond its own internal conflicts. In remembering Gelsamina Verde, Italy remembers not a participant in the Camorra, but one of its innocent victims. Throughout the investigation, the trials, and the years that followed, one conclusion remained consistent. Gelsamina had no criminal record. She was not involved in the Camorra. She did not participate in drug trafficking or organized violence. She worked at a leather factory, devoted part of her time to volunteer activities, and lived the life of an ordinary young woman. Every official finding reinforced those facts. Yet those facts did not protect her. They did not prevent members of the DeLauro clan from believing that she might possess information about Gennaro Netturno, her former boyfriend, who had become associated with the rival Sicionisti faction. Their relationship had already ended months before her abduction, and investigators ultimately concluded that she most likely did not know where he was hiding. Even so, suspicion replaced certainty. Assumption replaced evidence. In that moment, innocence lost its ability to shield her from the violence surrounding Naples. That reality explains why her case continues to resonate so deeply. Organized crime is often discussed through statistics, arrests, drug seizures, and the names of criminal leaders. Public attention frequently centers on those who command organizations or carry out violent acts. Yet those numbers and headlines can obscure the individuals whose lives are altered forever despite having no involvement in criminal activity. Gelsomina Verde reminds us that the consequences of organized crime cannot be measured solely by the number of gang members killed or imprisoned. Every act of violence ripples outward, reaching parents, siblings, friends, neighborhoods, and innocent civilians whose only misfortune is standing somewhere along the path of a criminal conflict. The first Scampia feud itself became one of the defining episodes in the history of the Camorra. The conflict between the DeLauro clan and the Sicionisti faction demonstrated how internal struggles for power could transform entire communities into places overshadowed by fear. Rival groups hunted one another relentlessly, seeking control over lucrative drug trafficking routes and eliminating perceived threats through kidnappings, interrogations, and executions. During such conflicts, the distinction between direct participants and those merely connected through family or personal relationships became increasingly fragile. Gelsomina's murder illustrated that transformation with devastating clarity. She was not chosen because of anything she had done. She was chosen because someone believed she could lead them to another person. Her own life became secondary to the objective pursued by her captors. For this reason, her story came to symbolize a broader truth about organized violence. Criminal organizations often justify their actions by claiming to pursue rivals, enforce loyalty, or protect their own interests. Yet the methods they employ frequently reveal a different reality. Violence does not remain confined within carefully defined boundaries. It spreads. It reaches those who never agreed to participate. It transforms ordinary relationships into potential liabilities. A former partner, a relative, or a friend may suddenly become vulnerable simply because someone imagines that useful information exists. Gelsomina Verde's murder stands as one of the clearest examples of how that process unfolds. Her death also became part of Italy's cultural memory through literature and television. The story of Gelsomina Verde was recounted by Roberto Saviano in Gomorrah, the influential work that examined the structure and violence of the Camorra. By including her story, Saviano highlighted not only the criminal organization itself, but also its human consequences. Rather than portraying organized crime as an abstract network of illicit business, he emphasized the ordinary lives disrupted and destroyed by its actions. Through this wider cultural attention, Gelsomina's name reached audiences far beyond Naples. Readers encountered her not as a statistic, but as a young woman whose future ended because of a conflict that had nothing to do with her own choices. Her influence extended further through the television adaptation Gomorrah. The character Manu in the first season was inspired by Gelsomina Verde's story, ensuring that the tragedy remained visible to new generations of viewers. Although dramatic works necessarily present fictional narratives, the inspiration drawn from Gelsomina reflected the enduring significance of her case within discussions about the Camorra's impact on Italian society. It served as another reminder that behind every headline lies an individual life with hopes, relationships, and aspirations that can never be restored once violence intervenes. Beyond books and television, Gelsomina Verde came to occupy an important place within anti-mafia remembrance in Italy. Her name is remembered among the innocent victims of organized crime, individuals whose lives were taken despite having no role in criminal activity. Such commemorations are not intended merely to preserve historical memory. They also serve as public acknowledgement that the damage inflicted by organizations like the Camorra extends beyond the world of criminals themselves. Every innocent victim challenges the false perception that organized crime affects only those who willingly enter its ranks. Gelsomina's story demonstrates that this belief is dangerously incomplete. The continuation of the investigation nearly 19 years after her death further reinforced that principle. The arrests of Luigi De Lucia and Pasquale Rinaldi in 2023 illustrated that the pursuit of accountability did not end with the earliest convictions. Even after decades had passed, Italian authorities continued examining new testimony and evidence in an effort to identify everyone believed to have participated in the kidnapping and murder. That persistence carried symbolic weight. It affirmed that the passage of time does not erase the responsibility to seek justice, particularly when the victim was someone entirely uninvolved in the criminal conflict that claimed her life. Yet perhaps the most enduring legacy of the case lies not within the courtroom, but within the questions it continues to raise. What happens to a society when suspicion becomes enough to justify violence? What happens when personal relationships become tools in a criminal strategy? How many ordinary lives are altered by conflicts that the wider public notices only when tragedy reaches the headlines? These questions have no simple answers, but Gelsomina Verde's story ensures they cannot be ignored. Her murder illustrates how organized crime exerts influence not only through illegal markets or territorial control, but through fear itself. Fear encourages silence. Fear isolates communities. Fear convinces people that ordinary life can disappear without warning. As this story comes to an end, it is worth returning to the image that opened it. A burned Fiat 600 stood in the darkness on the night of November 21st, 2004. Firefighters extinguished the flames. Investigators searched through the wreckage. At first, there was only destruction, uncertainty, and the body of a young woman whose identity had yet to be confirmed. The people standing around that vehicle could not have known that the investigation would continue for years, that multiple court proceedings would follow, or that nearly 2 decades later authorities would still be making arrests connected to the crime. They could not have known that Gelsomina Verde's name would become one of the most recognizable symbols of innocent victims of the Camorra. What they did know was that someone had gone to extraordinary lengths to conceal the truth. The body had been burned. The vehicle had been destroyed. The evidence had been deliberately obscured. Yet despite those efforts, the truth endured. Forensic examination established that she had been shot before the fire. Investigators reconstructed the kidnapping. Witnesses and cooperating members of the Camorra helped reveal why she had been targeted. Courts examined the evidence, imposed convictions, reviewed appeals, and continued pursuing additional suspects as new information emerged. Piece by piece, the attempt to erase both the victim and the crime ultimately failed. Today, Gelsomina Verde is remembered not because she belonged to the world of organized crime, but because she never did. She did not seek power. She did not profit from violence. She did not choose sides in the first Scampia feud. She happened to have once loved someone who later became part of a conflict that consumed countless lives. That single connection proved enough to place her in unimaginable danger. Her story is therefore not only a chapter in the history of the Camorra, but also a reminder of the human cost that accompanies every organized criminal conflict. Long after the gunfire faded and the flames were extinguished, her memory continues to speak with quiet clarity. It reminds us that behind every investigation lies a human life. Behind every court judgment, a family forever changed. And behind every statistic, an individual whose future was taken away. Among the many names associated with the violence of Naples in 2004, Gelsomina Verde endures as one of the clearest reminders that the greatest tragedy of organized crime is often borne not by those who create it, but by those who never belonged to it at all. History often remembers organized crime through the names of powerful bosses, notorious assassins, and violent conflicts fought over money and territory. Newspapers chronicle arrests, courts record convictions, investigators map criminal networks and reconstruct hierarchies that once appeared untouchable. Yet with the passing of time, many of those names gradually fade from public consciousness. Leadership changes, criminal organizations evolve, new investigations replace old ones. What remains far longer are the stories of those who never chose to enter that world in the first place. Among the countless lives touched by the violence of the Camorra, Gelsomina Verde continues to be remembered not because she held power, but because she possessed none. She became one of the enduring faces of innocence interrupted by a conflict that was never hers. When people revisit the events of November 2004, they often begin with the brutality of the crime itself. A young woman was deceived, kidnapped, questioned for hours, murdered, and placed inside her own vehicle before it was set on fire in an attempt to erase the evidence. Those facts alone remain deeply disturbing. But as the years have passed, the details that resonate most strongly are often the simplest ones. She was 21 years old. She worked in a leather factory. She volunteered her time to help others. She had no criminal record. She had no involvement with the Camorra. She was targeted only because she had once shared part of her life with someone who later became associated with a rival faction during the first Scampia feud. Every official investigation returned to that same conclusion. Every judicial proceeding reaffirmed it. The reason she died had nothing to do with who she was. It was entirely connected to what others wrongly believed she might know. There is a profound difference between becoming a victim because of one's own actions and becoming a victim because someone else imposes meaning upon an ordinary relationship. That distinction explains why Gelsomina Verde's story continues to carry emotional weight long after the legal proceedings entered the history books. She was not standing between rival gunmen during a spontaneous confrontation. She was deliberately selected. Her former relationship became evidence against her in the minds of people who viewed every personal connection as a possible source of intelligence. Their assumption proved tragically mistaken, but by the time that reality became clear, the opportunity to correct the mistake had already vanished forever. The investigation ultimately demonstrated something that extends beyond the boundaries of this single case. Organized crime is frequently described in terms of illegal markets, territorial disputes, and criminal enterprises. Those descriptions are accurate, but they can also create the impression that violence remains confined within the criminal world itself. The murder of Gelsomina Verde revealed a far more troubling reality. Criminal organizations do not exist in isolation. They operate within communities filled with ordinary families, workers, students, and neighbors. Their conflicts inevitably spread beyond those carrying weapons. Every feud creates circles of risk that expand outward until they reach people whose only connection to the conflict may be friendship, family, or love. Gelsomina stood within one of those circles without ever realizing it. During the years following her death, Anti-mafia organizations increasingly referred to Gelsomina as one of the innocent victims of the Camorra. This description carries particular significance because it shifts attention away from the perpetrators and toward the human consequences of their actions. Criminal organizations often seek recognition through fear. Acts of violence are intended to demonstrate power, punish betrayal, or intimidate rivals. Public memory, however, has the ability to reverse that intention. Rather than allowing attention to remain fixed on those responsible for terror, society can instead choose to remember the individuals whose lives were unjustly taken. In doing so, the narrative changes. The murder is no longer remembered primarily as another operation carried out during the Scampia feud. It becomes the story of a young woman whose ordinary future was stolen by extraordinary violence. This transformation of memory is reflected in the cultural legacy surrounding the case. Roberto Saviano's decision to include Gelsomina Verde's story in Camorra ensured that readers encountered not only the mechanics of the Camorra, but also its human cost. Organized crime is often discussed through structures, profits, and criminal strategies. By telling the story of Gelsomina, Saviano reminded readers that behind every criminal organization lies a trail of individual lives interrupted. Later, the television series Camorra drew inspiration from her story through the character of Manu in its first season, introducing the tragedy to audiences who may never have encountered the judicial record itself. Although fiction necessarily adapts reality, the inspiration remained rooted in the same historical truth. Innocent people can become casualties of conflicts they never joined. Perhaps one of the most remarkable aspects of the case is the way the search for accountability continued long after many observers assumed it had ended. Nearly 19 years after the murder, investigators announced new arrests connected to the crime. That development carried significance beyond the individuals involved. It demonstrated that time alone does not extinguish the responsibility to pursue justice. Organized crime investigations frequently evolve as new witnesses emerge and additional testimony becomes available. In Gelsomina's case, the continued investigative effort reflected a broader commitment by Italian authorities to reconstruct every possible aspect of the crime, even decades after the burned Fiat 600 had first been discovered. Such persistence sends an important message. Attempts to conceal violence through fear, silence, or destruction of evidence do not necessarily succeed forever. Yet, justice itself has limits. Courts can establish responsibility. Sentences can be imposed. Appeals can be heard. Additional suspects can be identified years later. None of these outcomes, however, can restore the life that ended on November 21st, 2004. The legal system exists to determine accountability, not to reverse loss. That reality is perhaps the most difficult truth surrounding every homicide investigation. Every verdict represents an acknowledgement that something irreversible has occurred. In Gelsomina's case, the law could identify participants, evaluate evidence, and issue judgments. But it could never return a daughter to her family, a friend to those who knew her, or a future to the young woman whose life ended at 21 years of age. Looking back today, the first Scampia feud occupies an important place in the history of the Camorra. Historians and investigators study to understand the dynamics of organized criminal conflict, the fragmentation of powerful clans, and the violence generated by struggles for control of illegal markets. Within that broader history, the murder of Gelsomina Verde serves a different purpose. It reminds us that every conflict measured through statistics is also measured through individual human lives. Reports may count the number of killings. Investigations may list the names of suspects. Court records may catalog evidence and verdicts. But behind each entry exists a personal story that deserves to be remembered with dignity rather then reduced to a number. For listeners reflecting on this case, there is another lesson worth considering. Violence rarely begins with its most visible consequences. Before there are murders, there are decisions. Before there are investigations, there are assumptions. Before a victim is identified, someone has already concluded that another person's life can be treated as expendable. In Gelsamina Verde's case, the fatal decision was rooted in the belief that she possessed information about a former boyfriend. Investigators later concluded that she almost certainly did not. The tragedy, therefore, emerged not from verified knowledge, but from suspicion reinforced by the ruthless logic of organized crime. When violence becomes an accepted method of obtaining answers, truth itself often becomes irrelevant. The consequences fall most heavily upon those least able to defend themselves. The image that remains is not one of the individuals responsible for the crime. It is not the burned vehicle or the courtroom where verdicts were announced. Instead, it is the image of an ordinary young woman whose life reflected the quiet routines shared by countless others. She went to work. She volunteered. She maintained relationships, as millions of people do. None of those ordinary experiences suggested that history would one day remember her. Yet history did remember her, not because of choices she made, but because her story exposed something essential about the cost of organized crime. Her name became a reminder that innocence offers no guarantee of safety when violence escapes the boundaries of those who create it. As this story closes, the facts remain unchanged. Gelsamina Verde was an innocent civilian. She was kidnapped on November 21, 2004, during the first Scampia feud. She was interrogated for hours about the whereabouts of Gennaro Natorno, her former boyfriend, who had become associated with a rival Sicilianisti faction. Investigators later concluded that she most likely did not know where he was. She was shot 3 times in the head and neck. Her body was placed inside her Fiat 600, and the vehicle was deliberately burned in an attempt to conceal the crime. Years of investigation, forensic examination, witness testimony, judicial proceedings, and subsequent arrests gradually reconstructed the truth despite those efforts. That truth endures because it was pursued with patience, tested through the courts, and preserved in public memory. The Camorra sought to erase the evidence. Time might have erased the headlines, but neither succeeded in erasing Gelsamina Verde. Today, her name continues to stand for every innocent person drawn into violence they never chose, every family forced to endure an unimaginable loss, and every investigation that refuses to surrender to silence. In the end, perhaps that is the most enduring form of justice. Not only that those responsible are pursued under the law, but that the victim is remembered for who she truly was, not a symbol of crime, not a participant in a feud, but a young woman whose ordinary life deserved the chance to continue. Her story endures because it reminds us that behind every criminal empire lies a human cost that can never be measured solely by convictions, arrests, or the passage of time. Some names become part of history because of the fear they created. Others remain because they remind us why justice, memory, and truth must continue long after the violence itself has ended. Gelsamina Verde belongs to the latter. Every true crime story eventually reaches a point where the investigation ends. The court delivers its verdict, and the documents are filed away into archives. At first glance, the case appears complete. Dates have been established. Evidence has been examined. Those found responsible have faced justice to the extent that the law allows, while investigations have continued whenever new evidence has emerged. Yet some cases refuse to remain confined within legal records because they reveal something larger than the crime itself. The murder of Gelsamina Verde is one of those cases. It is remembered not simply because of the brutality of what happened on November 21, 2004, but because it forces us to confront a difficult truth about organized crime. The people who suffer most are not always those who choose to participate in it. Sometimes they are the people who never expected to become part of its story at all. Throughout this case, one fact has remained unchanged from the first moments of the investigation until the present day. Gelsamina Verde was an innocent young woman. She worked at a leather factory. She devoted time to volunteer activities. She had no criminal record and no involvement with the Camorra. Her name entered a violent conflict for one reason alone. She had once been in a relationship with Gennaro Natorno, who later became associated with the Sicionisti faction during the first Scampia feud. By the time she was abducted, that relationship had already ended. Investigators would later conclude that she most likely did not know where he was hiding. Despite that, members of the Di Loro clan believed she could provide the information they desperately wanted. That mistaken belief cost her life. There's a painful irony at the center of this story. The entire kidnapping, the hours of interrogation, the fatal gunshots, and the attempt to destroy the evidence appear to have been driven by information that the victim almost certainly did not possess. The investigation never found evidence suggesting that Gelsamina was protecting a criminal organization or concealing the whereabouts of a fugitive. Instead, investigators concluded that she had become the victim of an assumption. Her captors acted as though certainty existed where, in reality, there was only suspicion. The consequences of that assumption were irreversible. Cases like this remind us that violence does not require hatred toward the victim. Sometimes violence is the product of indifference. Those responsible for Gelsamina's murder did not need to know her personally. They did not need to accuse her of committing a crime. They only needed to convince themselves that her life had become useful for achieving another objective. Once that decision had been made, her humanity disappeared from their calculations. She ceased to be a young woman with her own future and became, in their eyes, a possible source of information. The tragedy of organized crime is often found precisely in this ability to reduce human beings to instruments rather than individuals. The investigation, however, refused to accept that reduction. Every forensic examination, every witness statement, every judicial hearing gradually restored what the perpetrators had attempted to erase. The fire that consumed her Fiat 600 was intended to destroy evidence. Instead, forensic analysis established that Gelsamina had died before the vehicle was burned. Investigators reconstructed the sequence of the kidnapping. Testimony from witnesses and cooperating members of the Camorra helped explain why she had been targeted. Courts examined the evidence, distinguished between the roles of different participants, issued convictions where the evidence supported them, reviewed appeals, and continued pursuing additional suspects as new information emerged years later. Piece by piece, the truth returned. Justice, however, is rarely a perfect conclusion. Courtrooms can determine responsibility, but they cannot restore possibility. They cannot return birthdays that will never be celebrated, conversations that will never take place, or futures that ended before they truly began. Gelsamina Verde was 21 years old. Everything that might have followed, years of work, friendships, ambitions, and ordinary moments, ended because she was caught within the logic of a criminal conflict that had nothing to do with her own decisions. That loss cannot be measured through prison sentences alone. Perhaps that is why her name continues to be remembered across Italy. She has become one of the symbols of the innocent victims of the Camorra, not because symbolism was ever something she sought, but because her story illustrates with unmistakable clarity the true cost of organized crime. Criminal organizations often measure success through territory, influence, and profit. Society measures their legacy differently. It remembers the families left behind. It remembers the communities forced to live with fear. It remembers the ordinary people whose lives were interrupted without reason. Gelsomina Verde now stands among those remembered not for what they did, but for what was taken from them. Her story also reminds us that memory itself can become a form of resistance. Organized crime frequently depends upon silence. Fear discourages witnesses from speaking. Intimidation isolates communities. Violence sends a message that challenging criminal power carries unbearable consequences. Yet every investigation that uncovers the truth, every court proceeding that examines the evidence, every book that records the facts, and every person who remembers the victim weakens that silence. The attempt to erase Gelsomina through fire ultimately failed because the truth proved more enduring than the destruction intended to conceal it. The continuing investigation, including the arrest made nearly 19 years after the murder, reinforces another important lesson. Time does not necessarily protect those responsible for violent crime. Organized crime investigations often move slowly because evidence emerges gradually. Witnesses find the courage to speak years later, and new information reshapes old conclusions. The pursuit of accountability may take decades, but persistence itself reflects a commitment to the principle that innocent victims deserve every possible effort to establish the truth. Gelsomina's case demonstrates that justice is sometimes measured not only by verdicts, but also by the determination never to abandon the search. As we conclude this story, it is worth remembering how easily history can become dominated by the names of those who commit violence rather than those who endure it. The first Scampia feud produced numerous criminal figures, investigations, and convictions. Many of those names occupy significant places within the history of the Camorra. Yet among them stands the name of a young factory worker whose life followed an entirely different path. She neither sought power nor profited from crime. She did not participate in the feud that ultimately claimed her life. Her only connection was a relationship that had already become part of her past. That ordinary fact became the reason she was chosen. There is no lesson that can erase such a tragedy, and there is no ending capable of making it feel complete. The purpose of remembering cases like Gelsomina Verde's is not to dwell on violence for its own sake, nor to grant notoriety to those responsible. It is to recognize the value of a life that should never have been lost and to understand the consequences that organized crime imposes upon society far beyond its own members. Every innocent victim reminds us that criminal organizations are not isolated worlds operating apart from ordinary communities. Their actions inevitably reach beyond their own circles, affecting people whose only connection is proximity, friendship, family, or, as in Gelsomina's case, a relationship that had already ended. When the burned Fiat 600 was discovered in Secondigliano in November 2004, investigators faced a scene that appeared intended to erase both evidence and identity. Nearly 2 decades later, the opposite has happened. The evidence has been reconstructed. The identity has never been forgotten. Gelsomina Verde's story continues to be told because it represents far more than one homicide. Investigation. It stands as a reminder that behind every organized crime conflict are ordinary human lives whose value cannot be measured by their connection to the perpetrators, but by the simple fact that they deserve the chance to continue living. If there is one lasting thought to carry away from this case, it is this: the true measure of justice is not only found in convictions or prison sentences, but also in the refusal to allow innocent victims to disappear into statistics or history's margins. Gelsomina Verde entered history against her will, but she remains there because people continue to remember who she truly was, a young woman whose ordinary life was interrupted by extraordinary violence, whose innocence was affirmed by every stage of the investigation, and whose memory has become a lasting reminder that the greatest victims of organized crime are often those who never chose to stand anywhere near it. Her story ends in tragedy, but its legacy endures as a call to remember, to seek truth, and to recognize the immeasurable human cost hidden behind every act of organized violence. Every story we have explored throughout this journey has been built from the same foundation: documented facts, judicial findings, forensic evidence, and the painstaking work of investigators determined to uncover the truth. The story of Gelsamina Verde is no different. It begins with a young woman living an ordinary life in Naples and ends with one of the most heartbreaking symbols of the first Scampia feud. Between those two moments lies a sequence of events that demonstrates not only the brutality of organized crime, but also the extraordinary importance of truth, justice, and memory. When people hear the words organized crime, they often imagine powerful bosses, secret meetings, violent rivalries, and profitable criminal enterprises. Those images dominate headlines and history books because they appear dramatic and larger than life. Yet they tell only part of the story. Hidden beneath every criminal organization are countless ordinary people whose names rarely appear in newspapers until tragedy forces the world to notice them. Gelsamina Verde was one of those people. She was not remembered because she sought attention. She was remembered because violence found her despite every indication that she had done nothing to deserve it. She was 21 years old. She worked in a leather factory. She devoted part of her time to volunteer activities. She had no criminal record and no involvement with the Camorra. These are not extraordinary details, but perhaps that is exactly why they matter. They remind us that history is not shaped only by famous individuals or powerful institutions. Sometimes history changes forever because an ordinary life is interrupted by circumstances completely beyond that person's control. Gelsamina did not wake up on November 21st, 2004, expecting to become part of one of Italy's most remembered organized crime cases. She expected another day like countless others. Instead, she became the victim of assumptions made by people who viewed human lives as tools to be used in pursuit of power. Throughout this case, investigators consistently returned to one conclusion. Gelsamina's former relationship with Gennaro Natorno had already ended months before the kidnapping. Everything they later discovered suggested that she most likely did not know where he was hiding. Nevertheless, members of the Di Loro clan believed otherwise. That mistaken belief became the foundation of every event that followed. She was deceived into attending a meeting. She was abducted. She was interrogated for hours. She was subjected to violence intended to force information from someone who almost certainly possessed none. Finally, she was shot 3 times in the head and neck, and her body was placed inside her own Fiat 600 before the vehicle was deliberately burned in an attempt to conceal both the murder and the evidence surrounding it. Even today, those facts remain difficult to comprehend, not because they are impossible to understand, but because they reveal how quickly ordinary humanity can disappear when violence becomes routine. Organized crime often depends upon reducing individuals to their perceived usefulness. In Gelsamina's case, her identity as a daughter, a worker, a volunteer, and a young woman with hopes for the future became irrelevant to those responsible. They saw only a possible connection to someone they wished to find. The investigation later proved that this assumption was almost certainly wrong. Yet by then, the consequences had become irreversible. And still, despite the attempt to erase both the evidence and the victim, the truth survived. The forensic examination established that Gelsamina had died before the fire consumed the vehicle. Investigators reconstructed her final movements. Witnesses contributed information that helped reveal how she had been lured into the trap. Individuals who later cooperated with judicial authorities allowed prosecutors to piece together the sequence of events inside the world of the Camorra itself. Court proceedings examined each role separately, distinguishing between those who participated directly, those who facilitated the kidnapping, and allegations concerning those believed to have directed the operation. Convictions were secured where the evidence supported them. Appeals were heard according to the standards required by law. Even nearly 19 years after the murder, investigators continued making arrests as new testimony emerged. The pursuit of accountability did not end because the headlines faded. It continued because justice demands persistence, especially when the victim can no longer speak for herself. Perhaps that is the greatest lesson left behind by this case. Justice is not measured only by the speed with which it arrives. Sometimes it advances slowly, one witness at a time, one forensic conclusion at a time, one courtroom decision at a time. The investigation into Gelsamina Verde's murder reminds us that truth often survives because people refuse to stop searching for it. Every investigator who revisited the evidence, every prosecutor who presented the case, every judge who carefully evaluated the facts, and every witness who eventually chose to cooperate became part of that continuing search. Together, they ensure that the attempt to bury the truth beneath fire and fear ultimately failed. Yet no legal outcome can restore what was taken. Every conviction acknowledges responsibility, but none can replace a lost future. Gelsamina will always remain 21 years old. She will never grow older in the memories of those who loved her. Her family was deprived not only of the person she was, but also of every milestone that might have followed. Every birthday, every achievement, every ordinary moment that makes up a lifetime. Organized crime steals far more than lives. It steals futures that can never be reconstructed. This is why her story continues to occupy such an important place within Italy's remembrance of innocent victims of the Camorra. She did not become a symbol because she sought recognition. She became one because her experience revealed, with painful clarity, the human cost hidden beneath criminal power. The Camorra's internal feud was fought over influence, territory, and illegal markets. But its consequences extended into the lives of people who had no stake in that struggle. Gelsamina's death became a reminder that criminal organizations never truly limit their violence to those inside their own ranks. Fear spreads outward. Suspicion spreads outward. Tragedy spreads outward. Ordinary communities pay the price. Her story also carries another enduring message. Memory itself can become an act of justice. Those responsible attempted to destroy evidence by burning her body inside her own vehicle. Fire was meant to erase identity, eliminate forensic traces, and make reconstruction impossible. Instead, the opposite occurred. Investigators identified her. Forensic experts determined the true cause of death. The courts established accountability where the evidence permitted. Writers recorded her story. Anti-mafia organizations continue to remember her among the innocent victims of organized crime. Her name has outlived the flames that were meant to conceal it. As listeners, readers, or students of true crime, it is important to remember why stories like this deserve to be told. They are not opportunities to glorify violence or to admire the cruelty of criminal organizations. The purpose is exactly the opposite. By understanding what happened to Gelsamina Verde, we recognize the devastating consequences that organized crime imposes upon individuals who never choose to become part of it. We remember that behind every investigation lies a human being, behind every forensic report a family searching for answers, and behind every court judgment a life that can never be returned. If there is one image worth carrying beyond this story, it is not the burned Fiat 600, nor the courtroom where verdicts were announced, nor the names of those convicted. Instead, it is the image of Gelsamina before any of those events unfolded, a young woman living an ordinary life, working honestly, helping others through volunteer activities, and looking toward a future she believed was still ahead of her. That image reminds us what was truly lost. It reminds us why justice matters. And it reminds us that every innocent victim deserves to be remembered, not for the violence that ended their life, but for the humanity that defined it. Thank you for taking the time to follow this case from beginning to end. Stories like Gelsomina Verde's ask us to do more than observe the facts. They ask us to remember the people behind those facts. They ask us to recognize that organized crime leaves wounds extending far beyond the criminal world itself. Most importantly, they remind us that truth can survive even the most determined attempts to destroy it. Nearly 2 decades after November 21st, 2004, the flames are long extinguished. The investigations have revealed what they could, the courts have spoken where evidence allowed, and history has preserved the name of Gelsomina Verde. She is remembered not because of the violence committed against her, but because her life continues to stand as a lasting testament to the innocent people whose futures are stolen when criminal power places fear above humanity. And as long as her story continues to be told with accuracy, dignity, and respect for the facts, the attempt to erase her will never truly succeed.